Florida's Space Coast, this is your career.
Welcome to Your Career. I'm Debbie Featherston, your host, and with me tonight is Kathryn Creedy. And Kathryn, I am glad that you have come back for another program. I had you on to talk about careers in aviation,
Yes.
and you've returned to talk to me about another field that you are really an expert in, and that is careers in journalism and communication.
Yes. So I spent my career doing that.
Yes. Well, tell our audience about your background because it's very rich. I'm just curious, how did you get started? And tell us a little bit about the journey that your career has taken.
Well, I got started as a teenager when I asked my father to teach me how to write like a reporter. And during my entire teenage years, he was teaching me the craft.
Wow.
And he was teaching me the ethics and the responsibilities of journalism. So that's basically how I got started. And then I went to American Airlines in their public relations department. And then I really kicked off my aviation journalism career. Freelancing at first, and I was Midwest Bureau Chief for Traffic World magazine, and then I did freelancing for several publications I had met in Washington, and I was hired full-time by one of those publications, and then I launched my own newsletter after that. So, and that's really what I cut my teeth on. I did a weekly newsletter on the regional airline industry just post-deregulation, and that's when it was booming. So, and nobody else was paying attention to them. So that's a lesson I learned very, very early: is find a niche and do the best you can in that niche, because people will pay attention. People will be drawn to your news because of that.
That's fascinating. You know, this industry, as we talked in advance of the show, you had said has changed dramatically. You know, having been in the field for so long, what are some of the changes that you're seeing that you feel will really are impacting people in the field now, or will be entering soon?
Well, the changes are amazing. I think beginning in the late 80s and 1990s, we began to move away from traditional journalism, which I describe as tell both sides of the story and let the reader decide, and do as a balanced a story as you possibly can. And then we began to go in another direction with the development of Fox News, and on the other side, MSNBC and things like that. And it was more biased journalism. And I remember I have a brother who likes Fox News, and I would dutifully watch it when I was visiting, and I'd just shake my head and be embarrassed about it, because it was not the traditional journalism that I knew and I learned. And then I have another brother who's hooked on MSNBC, and so I remember going to visit him and being equally embarrassed because this was not the news that I learned in my career. So we began to have opinionated journalism, even for a straight news story. There was always an opinion at the end, or an opinion somehow the writer inserted them in the story, and
that's very prevalent today.
It's very prevalent today, and there's really nothing wrong with that as long as you know what you're getting ahead of time. I write opinion pieces. I write biased pieces. I tell both sides of the story, but I say this is why that side isn't as accurate as they would have you to believe, but those are opinion pieces. So today, so that's the first wave of change that I saw in the 1990s and the early 2000s.
A shift away from what we would call the Walter Cronkite,
Exactly, exactly. And so today we now have 24-hour news cycle, and the news cycle is about has no shelf life. It is about 10 minutes long, and so you have to keep feeding the beast, as I call it. And the other thing, the big thing that we saw in the 2000s is the rise of the internet media and the rise of social media as well. So those have had profound impacts on the craft of journalism. And the craft has evolved to incorporate those new technologies. So
Let me take you back. With the internet, how can you give me an example of how that's really impacted journalism?
well, first of all, it's drawn readers away.
Okay.
So we've had many, many newspapers around the country, old, venerable newspapers, go out of business.
Definitely.
Or merged with another brand because they just didn't get the advertising because the advertising was driving
Right.
over to the internet. So that's number one,
Yeah.
fewer journalism jobs.
Yeah. Okay.
And yes, they migrated to the internet, and we have. But here again is that niche. They develop niches. There's the computer news. There's aviation news. There's all these little niches around the internet who become expert. And there's so I think you also saw a real change from long form journalism. Where you really take a in-depth look. You had
Right.
television, which was for the superficial look. You had newspapers for the in-depth look. Today, then, as we began to evolve, we had the attention span was about 2 minutes, and therefore you had shorter and shorter and shorter stories. So that was a huge shift in journalism. And then going to the internet, they just thought because it's printed on the internet, it must be so. And we've learned over the last few years that just because it's on the internet, it doesn't necessarily make it so. And if you say, well, I read it on the internet, you're immediately thought to be an idiot. But maybe not that harsh, but we're looking for sources that are reliable. So we've swung over this way to the internet and
Right.
sources willy-nilly, not
Right.
sourced at all. And now we're swinging back, and I see a real change in the last 2 years of people looking for reliable sources, especially since the election. And I see the millennials. I just read a study that the millennials are now moving toward not only moving toward reliable traditional journalism like the New York Times, the
Right.
Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, U.S. News, and World Report, whatever the
Right.
political leaning, it doesn't matter. They're
No.
moving towards, because they want to know what's real. They don't want to fake news. So when I see the millennials moving towards this, I think, well, there's real hope, because not only are they moving towards more traditional journalism, such as the publications I named, but they're also moving towards long-form journalism. So they're subscribing.
That to me is really encouraging, Kathryn.
Very
because,
encouraging.
You know, to me it's such an insult, but it's also an aggravation, depending on what perspective you have. That the attention span is 2 minutes.
Right.
Because when I take a look at the media, I go, this is just garbage.
Yeah.
It's so superficial. Well, I don't even want to waste my time.
You mentioned Walter Cronkite. Walter Cronkite had 30 minutes of news.
Right.
Now we have about 10 minutes, no commercials,
Right.
of news, and the rest is Entertainment Tonight.
It's, yeah.
So, and it's very frustrating to me. So I watch the top of the news, and then I go to PBS NewsHour, because I know that they'll give me the news of the day in capsule form, and then they'll do long form journalism by interviewing each side and letting me decide on which way I want to I want to have my opinion.
Yeah.
But it's also encouraging that the millennials are now going toward long form journalism, because we're talking about the New Yorker.
Right.
We're talking about the Atlantic. And on the, I'm not familiar with the ones on the Republican side, but they're seeking articles that will explain the entire issue and give them historical context, because one of the things that we've lost is the historical context with many of the short form journalism. And that's where you get, oh, so that's why it's such a big deal.
Yeah.
I think it's extremely encouraging that millennials are moving away from just getting their news on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and et cetera, on the social media, towards long form journalism, but more established journalism that will give them real news, not fake news.
Yeah, I want to go back to the Walter Cronkite of the world, because I think one of the, and that, of course, it's generational perhaps, but growing up with that type of journalism and then seeing this shift to the opinion, it's like, I don't care about what your opinion is. Who are you? Why would I bother? It's like going to Hollywood and getting their opinion. I really don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it depends on education and training and depth of knowledge in the field and exposure to this particular subject. That's what you're looking for, somebody that's got real credibility on that topic.
Right, right.
So
that's what we always looked for when we were selecting our news sources. And then the baby boomers kind of got older and older, and that's why you see only healthcare commercials on nightly news, because it's the baby boomers who are watching it. But now the millennials, the younger generation, are coming up, and they're getting their news from real stories, real journalists.
Yeah. Well, that's why I bring it up, is because, what really, for those that are interested in going into journalism, they have any interest in communication, right, these two areas, what really is a mark, right? What are some indicators of really a good journalist today?
Well, a good journalist today will give you not only the news, but will tell you what it means. When I look at the most of the news that I consume, it's something that I could get from a press release. And I see it in all sorts of publications, the same news, because it does come from a press release. I don't think that's worthy of my time. Yes, it's nice to know that Boeing just sold 67 airplanes to an airline, but what does that mean? Yeah. And so the journalism I work on is, what does it mean? What does it mean to the industry? What does it mean to the airline? What's the background of it? I want to put it into context so that the reader will understand the gravity of the situation or the funniness or whatever. The reader will get it. And
well, they may be able to see some opportunity, because as you were talking about it, I look at some of those stories from the angle of, what does this mean in terms of the growth for the industry? What impact might this have on the workforce, the skill set, the knowledge? Is there new technology with the development of that aircraft or...
Right, exactly. Those are the types of real meaty, the real meaty subject. But I also think that what we have also done is lost the ability to track trends, and that's another thing I specialize in.
That's wonderful.
I probably do a review about 1,000 to 1,500 stories a day. I don't read them all. I just go through my news feed, and I think, okay, that's something I'm interested in because I see a trend there. So I like.
What would capture your eye to say that you see a trend there?
Well,
of course, it's built on already an established database, right?
Exactly. Well, in the aviation industry, it would be the move from embedded systems in in-flight entertainment to satellite systems, and it's a move to new training for the pilots. So yeah, that's what I look for. We now have a electric aircraft, and so I'm collecting all the stories I see on electric aircraft because I'm ultimately I'm going to have to do a story on them, because they will be the next big thing. And so, but I see a lot of the coverage, especially in aviation, and not only in aviation, this is across the board, where the trends are not identified. So when I pitch a story to one of my 7 clients, I write for 7 different publications. When I pitch a story, I say, here's the trend that I'm seeing, and nobody's covering it. And so my success rate for pitching a story is much higher because I've identified something nobody else is covering yet. So that's another thing you should do if you're interested in a subject, is watch for trends. And there'll be a little story here and a little story here and a little story here, and you put them all together and it becomes a trend story, and you begin watching it, and then it becomes this is game changing for the industry. So, or the news or whatever. So I think that in our rush to have this 24-hour news cycle and feed the beast all the time, we have lost the ability to actually identify trends, and then we don't have the time to actually pursue those trends. So I began to see in the 1990s a real shift in regional airlines in where they were flying and what they were flying and who they were flying, et cetera, and that culminated a decade later in a landmark series I did for Forbes Online, which talked about the changes in the regional airline industry and why we have a pilot shortage and what contributed to it. And not only was it the airlines that contributed to it, but it was the unions that contributed to it. And so I built this case, and then I said, here's what we need to do going forward to solve this problem. And it's not going to take one thing or another thing. It's going to take a whole range of things. So at least I was able to contribute to the conversation and move it along.
Yeah.
And yes, it was opinion. A lot of it, some of it was opinion, but most of it was factual data that I've gathered over the years. But at the same time, it was it was able to say what it meant and move the conversation along.
It also would probably, from the sounds of it, invoke or not invoke, but stimulate some real thought-provoking.
Yes.
Right on the part of the reader. They're really going, oh wow, and maybe pique some curiosity, get people to go a little deeper and invest a little more time.
Exactly.
Particularly if this is my industry, or whether we're talking about foreign affairs or politics or some other industry.
But that's what I'm trying to get. I'm trying to spark a conversation that is unconventional on the topic. I have a blog called Winging It that I can't really pay a lot of attention to because I'm too busy, but I call it the unconventional wisdom in the aviation industry because I want to spark a conversation I want to spark an idea that maybe somebody hadn't thought of before. And by following those trends, et cetera, I can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're so right, because I know when I'm working with people who are looking at managing their careers, I'm always telling them you have to pay attention to the trends. What are the trends that are impacting your industry over the next let's say 2 years? Don't go any further than 2 years out. But what are some of the trends that are currently impacting, or do you anticipate are going to be impacting the industry within 2 years? What implications do those trends have on your role?
Right.
The future of your job. Are you going to need additional knowledge or skill sets? Is your job dying? Are there going to be different opportunities that are evolving? And talking about that, let's move our conversation along and talk about automation and the impact of automation on your industry.
For a decade or more, I thought, well, journalism, that can't be automated, so I'm pretty safe.
Yeah.
But about 3 years ago, the Associated Press began using automation to report the news. And the way they did that is they did it for the financial reports. Every quarter, every company has a financial report, and they take the press release and they can automate that into a story. Profits, loss, whatever, earnings per share, that type of thing. So yeah, that can be automated. Well, if that can be automated, can something else be automated? So I am no longer sanguine about the fact that journalism can't be automated, because I think that given enough creativity, you can pretty much automate everything. And we've seen the outsourcing of jobs to automation going back until to the 70s, and then in the auto industry in the 80s. And so the big mistake America made was in not having a government program like they do around the rest of the world to retrain the talent to do the automation, to take care of the automation. And whenever I've asked that job, okay, this is going to be automated, that's great. So what are we going to do for a living once it's automated? There'll be plenty of new jobs. It's not very helpful, because I don't know what those jobs are. They might be maintaining the computers. They might be, but nobody said, we're going to need this job or that job or that job, and nobody's retooling anybody. Yeah. And it's the mistake. The reason I say it's a mistake is that a lot of those workers from the 80s and 90s went back to school took out the loans, did all of that, and then still couldn't find jobs. And so that they were left with a lot of debt that they couldn't really address. So really, we need the entire country needs a conversation on how are we going to automate. It's going to come.
It is coming.
Right.
It's in process
yeah,
in many
it's in
industries.
Process. It's going to come. So what can we do about it? How can we plan for it? And that's a conversation the country is not really having.
Yeah. You know, when you look at the work that we do, our professions are going to evolve, right? We have to take, there has to be ownership on my part to manage my own career and to really pay attention to the trends. But I think companies do share some responsibility in helping with the retooling and helping people be aware of what the future may hold. But I think maybe we have lost sight of some really great opportunities, or not opportunities, but resources that the U.S. Department of Labor has, and it's readily available. Anyone that has a computer has it, and that's the U.S. Bureau of Statistics, and Department of Labor has tons of great information.
I use that all the time, especially when I want to know salaries, salary levels in my career, but also what the average salary is for pilots or any of the ones that are in the aviation industry that I'm interested in, because I'm constantly reporting on HR issues in aviation. So
yeah, there's a lot of good resources out there, but I think the average person probably just doesn't have an idea of where they are.
Yeah,
and that maybe is part of one of those career development programs. It's something that should be integrated into a career development program that might help them.
Yeah,
great points that you've raised here. You know, when we're thinking about a person that is wanting to just enter the field of journalism, you know, what suggestions do you have? Let's say I've got a high schooler, for example, and they just are really passionate about it. They know they're a good writer. They enjoy it. What are some things that you would suggest? What are some opportunities that might help them to further develop?
Freelancing for local papers. Now, I'm not suggesting Florida Today, but we've got a ton of local papers in this area, and their weeklies, Brevard Business Times, and freelancing for, so that's number one.
Sure.
But also,
oh, there's magazines even they probably could freelance for, right?
Right, exactly. But also, if they're interested in broadcast, volunteering, every single local television has internships, and so get on those internships, learn everything you can. And as I was telling you before, I had there's a woman president in the airline industry. Her name is Linda Markham, and she's president of Cape Air. And she began her career at Cape Air in human resources. And she was tasked with developing coalitions around the company to get things done. So whenever she was in one of these meetings and they had to, and they said, well, we need to get this done, and who's going to do it? She would volunteer. And she would say, I'll get a committee together, we'll do it, we'll make it happen. And so by doing that, she basically established herself as a can-do person. She established herself as a collaborator and somebody who values other people's opinions. So by the time she rose through the ranks at Cape Air, she and was being considered for the presidency, the entire company was behind her, from the maintenance technician to the res agent to I don't care who it was. They were behind her because they'd already worked with her. Yeah, they knew who she was and how they would impact their careers. So volunteering is big time, and leaning in, as Sheryl Sandberg says, you know, and taking up the tasks and getting it done, because you'll make a difference. People will notice. Right. And I never did that consciously, but I did it unconsciously, and people noticed. You know?
That makes a great, you know, that's really a great advice for somebody, and particularly when they're young, or and you don't have, the person doesn't have to actually be young. They could be mid-career and deciding that they want to move into communication or take on a role in journalism of some sort. What about the blogs and the different online mediums as a way to just get experience in writing?
Well, I think that's an excellent suggestion. I think you should write every day. So if you're serious about getting into this, and so, okay, writing every day sounds a little bit ambitious, so set yourself a goal of 3 times a week. So write every day. Edit. Find somebody to look over your material and give you suggestions. Hopefully, a professional writer. We have Cape Canaveral Pen Women. We have Space Coast Writers Guild. We have, and I'm sure they would love to mentor. The journalism associations also have mentors, literal mentors. You sign up to be a mentor, and so take advantage of those programs as well. And then be professional. Do not be a geeky student. You want to be professional. You want your Facebook to look professional. You want your LinkedIn to look professional. You want your Twitter to look professional. And this is something kids have yet to learn, but even when Facebook was first starting, we were warning, you watch what you put on Facebook, because it's out there forever.
Right.
So if you exude a professional image, if you look professional, if you act professional, if you adopt the professional codes, then you'll go further faster.
Right, absolutely. And let's just take, in the last couple minutes we've got, let's just take a little bit more time around professionalism. Professionalism is definitely in how one wears their hair, how they, if they're female, any makeup that they wear, jewelry, accessories, clothing, be modest, I think, is very important.
You can look feminine, but you have to look professional at the same time.
Well, Kathryn, as always, you have treated us with a wealth of information. Thank you for being here. And thank you on behalf of my guest and everyone here on the set of Your Career for watching. And remember, be career happy.
More information about this program is available online at millermediagroup.org.